Hey, welcome to Wine Talks with Paul Key, and we are in studio today in beautiful Southern California, about to have a conversation with Zack Abbott of, I don't even know the name of the company. What's the name of the company?
Z-Biotics.
Z-Biotics, sorry, that's on here. Wine Talks, of course, available on iHeartRadio, Pandora, Spotify, wherever you hang out for podcasting, and sponsored by the Original Wine of the Month Club, now sporting the Napa and organic series of wines. Hey, listen, have a conversation or have a listen to Leah Poveda of Glenelly Wine from South Africa. She's up right now. Just went out yesterday. Absolutely intoxicating conversation with this young woman who has a South African, English, and French accent. So you can understand where I'm coming from. But it's a great conversation to have a listen. But not while we're here today. Here to have a conversation with Zack Abbott about Z-Biotics and a product that I think all of you are going to be interested in, which is an anti-hangover product. And so we have a few conversations about that and some interesting conversation. But Zachary, welcome to the show.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to chat with you about this.
So do they call you doctor?
They do not, even though I do have a PhD in microbiology, but that is, I typically don't, make people do that. Although I did make my older brothers do it a little bit.
Oh, good. Yeah, that's
yeah.
I always wonder, when you talk to an education PhD versus sort of a medical doctor. When I say doctor, my wife's cousin insists on it, and I had a conversation with there's a guy named Clinton Lee. We ought to talk to him too. Actually, he runs an organization called the Asian Pacific Wine and Spirits Institute. He is a PhD in business. Incredible conversation. So somebody will have to connect you with on this product.
That'd be great.
But tell me the track about becoming a PhD in microbiology. What was that about? What were you thinking? Was there an entrepreneurial spirit behind this in the beginning? What happened here?
Yeah. Actually, no. I went to undergrad and I studied science, but I also studied classical art and archeology. I was kind of all over the map and had a lot of interest, but wasn't sure exactly what I wanted to do. And so after college, I actually went out and just had a series of different kind of jobs, testing different things out, and knew I was always interested in science, and so I got back into science. I did some bartending and construction work even, and then I was working at I got a job at a chemistry lab and was doing environmental chemistry for a little while. But my real passion or interest was in biology. And so I ended up getting a job at UC Davis doing work in an HIV research lab there for about a year and a half, and really loved that. And so that's what inspired me to go back and get my PhD. I wasn't exactly sure what I was going to do, but I knew this is what I wanted to be in. And looking around at the opportunities, having a PhD would definitely open some doors into some things I wanted to do. But I don't come from a family of entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurship was not on my radar at all. In fact, the original seed for the idea that would become Z-Biotics actually happened when I was working at that lab at UC Davis. And I ended up going through my whole PhD and just thinking about that idea, but never really working on it, and never really thinking of it as a business idea, more just thinking of it as a cool science or project.
Mm-hmm.
And then through a series of events, like some friends kind of hearing what I had to say and kind of saying, hey, you should start a company, and encouraged me to apply to some startup acceleration, things like that. That's really when I kind of got moving on actually turning this into a company. So it was never intentional. I think of myself as a scientist more than an entrepreneur, but then fell into it, and it's been a really fun journey kind of bringing this product to market.
Interesting that you're an archaeology major, and that now you're into the alcohol, sort of the periphery alcohol business, because the oldest winery ever discovered was in Armenia, 6,000 years old, which when you think about that age and the fermentation sciences being used back then, isn't that crazy?
It's honestly not that different. It's really, I always joke that, microbiology was probably the oldest science that we intentionally did through fermentation. We've been intentionally fermenting alcohol from fruits and grains and stuff for 6,000 years. So there's a lot of history of us being microbiologists. So there is a connection there for sure.
Well, that's an interesting point, actually, because I bring this up frequently with winemakers trying to understand, what's the end game when you think about it. If fermentation science really is microbiology, it happens on its own. If you leave a cluster of grapes around, they're going to ferment. because it's, in the skins. My daughter's a boulanger. She understands fermentation science from the, baking standpoint.
Right.
But if you think about it, what is the end game for all the technologies we used to potentially make a wine better, or any fermented beverage, other than the fact that you're just playing off of what's already there?
Well, I think that that's the best outcome, honestly, is like, look, there's 3 billion years of evolutionary history here, right? Like bacteria and in particular, but then, we use yeast a lot for these fermentations that are a little bit younger than bacteria. But that's a lot of time that they've gone around for perfecting this art. And so I think the best that we can do really is, rather than try and control every facet of it, is to work with nature and work with kind of like the billions of years of evolutionary history that have resulted in this process. And so I think that guiding it, or like leveraging parts we want and cleaning out parts we don't, is really the ultimately going to be the most efficient way for us to get to the best product with everything. I think when it comes to like thinking about biotechnology even more broadly than fermentation, which is, there's a lot of really incredible processes that have evolved over a long time from a biological standpoint. And so I think our task is, as scientists and humans, is really just looking and deeply understanding how those processes work, and then leveraging them, plugging them together in ways that are most efficient, rather than trying to reinvent the wheel every time. So I think that's the good outcome.
Well, that'll bring me right to one of the questions I had, which was this GMO. Hold on just a second. Hey, Stephen, the GMO conversation, right? We see all this packaging that says GMO, blah 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 blah, and it seems to be a very important part of today's microbiology, an important part of the evolution process you're talking about, an important part of moving the needle on a lot of things biologically. Is that not the case?
No, I mean, I think, from my perspective as a microbiologist and a synthetic biologist, somebody who works with genetic engineering, I think that it's an incredibly interesting and valuable tool in the toolbox. Like, does that mean that everything that's GMO is good or bad? Like, definitely not. It's a tool, and it can be used like any other tool to kind of create beneficial or harmful products, or be used in kind of like beneficial or harmful ways. And so I think that a lot of like these sort of unsavory business practices that have been used around genetic engineering have unfortunately kind of been conflated with the technology itself. And so a lot of people who like sort of self-identify as anti-GMO or non-GMO are really sort of like upset about like the use of, maybe the use or overuse, depending on how you look at it, of glyphosate and Roundup, and the way that certain businesses have used genetic engineering and sort of for business purposes. But I think that actually a lot of those people would actually align with the values that are pursued by genetic engineering. So the idea that we can make more resistant crops that are more hardy means that we can protect humanity from famine better. We can use less acres to grow the same amount of food, meaning less deforestation and less monoculture. I think that there's a lot of sustainability arguments you can make for the use of genetic engineering. That doesn't mean that it's always used well. And so I'm certainly not saying that like all GMOs are good, but I think the technology can be leveraged for good. And part of our mission actually at Zbiotics is trying to elevate that conversation, right? Like to beyond good or bad, into a more nuanced understanding, like with any other technology, right? At first, I think that there's this sort of kind of vocal fear, and for good reason, right? Like there needs to be a check and balance on like new technologies and making sure that they don't run willy-nilly. But if you think about like metallurgy as an example, right? Like it can be used to make a gun or a spoon, and people who are anti-guns are not anti-metallurgy, right? Like because they understand that the technology that built the product they don't like is not the problem. The problem is the use of that technology. And genetic engineering is a technology, and it can be used to make Roundup Ready corn, or it can be used to make human insulin, which is actually one of the probably the first use case of genetic engineering was Genentech engineered E. coli to make human insulin. Before that, we were isolating insulin from pigs and cows. We'd literally slaughter them by the tens of millions to isolate insulin from their liver and pancreas, and then load them up onto huge refrigerated trucks and isolate them. And now we can produce the same amount of insulin in basically an incubator the size of a a refrigerator. It's pretty amazing. And so that's a really positive use of genetic engineering. And I don't think anybody would be anti-GMO in that scenario, right? Because it's the life-saving medicine. But there's been other uses that have been not so great. So anyway, the goal is to kind of like elevate above that. And I think that, to your point, you walk through the grocery store and you see a lot of like non-GMO butterfly kind of labels on all the food, and that's unfortunate. I think a lot of brands have really jumped on the bandwagon here to fan the flames of fear in order to sell their products better. And so that's a very short-sighted strategy. The downside of that is it's throwing a very useful technology under the bus to make a few bucks now. I think that like that's sort of a taking advantage of consumer fear around genetic engineering, which is too bad.
I think that's accurate. I mean, the consumerism of all things. Let's just take organic wines for a second. I mean, it's the same thing. There's so much of the wines are already organic. So many families over the history of wine were growing things organically. They didn't want their kids crawling in the vineyards with pesticides, herbicides, and insecticides. But does GMO fly in the face of like a biodynamic farm? Is that, I mean, obviously they're complete opposites, but does it,
right?
Is it a conflict?
Yes, you see, I would argue that it shouldn't be. Right now, by definition, it is, in the sense that that organic is currently defined as both not using synthetic pesticides and fertilizers, and also not using genetic engineering. But I think that like really the goal, the underlying goal of organic farming and is the same, like as it's currently applied today. If you really think about organic farming, what it really is it's sort of like 17th century like the cutting edge agricultural technology from the 17th century applied today. Right. So that in and of itself is obviously not a good thing, right? We have a much bigger human race to feed these days. So using old technology is not good. But the reason we want that is because we're afraid of or reacting to the technologies we're using today. And I think that it's organic farming is basically throwing out the baby with the bathwater. It's saying that we don't want these bad things, so we won't take anything. And that is really, at the end of the day, not a sustainable choice either, because you can't, you're being more inefficient with the land, and you're not using the land to its full potential that way. And so using genetic engineering is a great way, for instance, to achieve the same goals of sustainability and reduce pesticide usage, reduce fertilizer usage, right? Like, so like you could, for instance, like you can use genetically engineered microbes that help fix nitrogen directly to the plant's root nodules, rather than using a ton of nitrogen fertilizer, which is one of the most damaging kind of ecological practices that we have in agriculture. And so there's some really cool things you could do, right? Where we are trying to achieve the same goals here of sustainability and better stewardship of the land. And I think that genetic engineering is a great tool for that. Now, it has been used to the antithesis of that, without a doubt, but unfortunately throwing out the whole technology because of the bad actors is, I think, like a step in the wrong direction. I would certainly advocate for kind of like the uniting of those two.
The book, The Third Plate by Dan Barber, the famed chef at Blue Hill Farms in New York, and farm to table cooking and all that. He talks about that in his book, and he talks about, you can't feed the world with the production of organic and specifically biodynamic farms. He also
the reason why they cost more, right? They're less efficient.
Less efficient, and they're not always better. By the way, sometimes I've had a couple of bad carrots over there from Whole Foods Market.
Right.
So here's a question I've been asking, and I had a nurseryman on the show, and he's obviously his job is to fly around the world and recommend based on terroir and soil content and all the chemicals in the soil, the natural value of the soil, to recommend particular vines. And so I said, well, there's 40,000 strains of wheat, for instance, all of them probably, naturally hybrid, right? We cross-strain wheat to be more resistant to weather. We cross-strain wheat to be adaptable to certain terroir types. How is that different than GMO? We're changing the molecular structure.
Yeah, all right. I would agree. I think in principle, it's the same. It's just an older and less effective way to do the exact same thing. And quite frankly, more dangerous, because basically when we do plant crossbreeding, the goal is, right, in every situation that we're describing here, the goal is to move a desirable trait from one plant to another, or one organism to another. And so if we do plant crossbreeding, we basically say like, I want to retain like the juiciness of this grape,
Hmm.
but I want to get the like the hardiness of this root, or whatever this other part of the grape plant, right? And so you cross those plants, and you select for the ones where a whole bunch of different outcomes will happen because it's just totally blind. You're just mashing their DNA together, and whatever crosses over, whatever crosses over. And so at some point, some percentage of them will get sort of like those two traits together that you wanted. It also will have changed a bunch of other things that you have no idea about. It's a complete black box. And the idea that that's a natural crossover and therefore safe in some way is kind of absurd, because we have plenty of examples from history of crossing over and having, first and foremost, I think the idea that nature is safe in and of itself is crazy. Like, I think people don't like, I mean, everybody knows that like there are so many poisonous plants out there, and every known toxin, and poison pretty much comes from plants. They're
Hmm.
probably our most dangerous enemies in a lot of ways. And so, and that can happen a lot. Like there's a good story about the Lenape potato, where they were basically trying to cross these two potatoes to get, they saw that this South American varietal of potato was really hardy and resistant to insects. And then they crossed it with this like this North American potato that had the perfect like carbohydrate and moisture like amounts, percentages to make a perfect potato chip. And so they basically wanted to keep that, but then also have it be like resistant to pests, like this South American potato. So they crossed them and they made this Lenape potato, which had all these properties, and they were so excited about it. But it turns out that the way that the plant was resistant to the pests was that it expressed this toxic molecule, which at a threshold below what would make a human sick. But then when they crossed it with this other potato, which also expressed different versions of that chemical, then together it made one that made a bunch of people sick. And so they had to pull the potato
Wow.
before we got started. And it's like that was like safe genetic engineering, in that we were crossing plants, but we had no idea what was happening in the genetics. And what's great about modern genetic engineering is that we can have perfect clarity into every single piece of every single base pair in the chromosome, right? So we could have literally taken the trait we wanted, put it in there, and not worried about all the other things that were happening there. And then we could have full genome sequence and know exactly what we did. And we'd obviously have to test it to make sure that the outcome was what we anticipated. But there's so much more control and clarity when you're using modern technology as opposed to ancient technology, which we understand and agree with in kind of other areas. And I think it gets a little dicey when it comes to people's food. But ultimately, that's kind of where we think we need to head, is having a more clarity and understanding.
I am so happy that I got a legitimate answer that I can have that conversation, particularly with millennials, about about GMO. Actually, you mentioned something interesting about the toxin in plants. My father, his a thesis at USC when he got his master's was that he found in a plant in Southern California the natural antidote to German nerve gas.
Oh wow.
So unfortunately, it was just a few years late. The war was already over,
Yeah.
but but he found it. And so that it tells you how toxic plants can be, as we all know. But anyway, I thought that was interesting. Can you tell then? I suppose since you're using chromosomes to fix these or modify these things, that you can look at the molecules of a plant and determine whether it was genetically modified in the lab or whether it was hybrid, because you can focus on particular genes by doing that, or would you not know?
You probably could. I think you could probably figure it out. It'd be like anything else. I guess if you didn't know before, there are certain markers that you would look for, and that would tell you whether or not it was likely to have been genetically engineered. But you wouldn't, depending on what the changes are, you wouldn't always necessarily know. So, for example, like you can make one of the advantages of genetic engineering is like the precision and the simplicity. So, like you can make a change to a single base pair. So like a single, piece of, a bit of code of the DNA.
Mm-hmm.
And so it would be very hard. So if you made that change could have arisen naturally as well. So, it'd be very hard to identify that as definitively genetically engineered. So, that's where I think the advantage lies, in the sense of like that it can have that level of precision, that you can make that single base pair change without changing a bunch of other things unintentionally, which is what would happen with sort of like crossbreeding. But of course, I guess if, from a if you're trying to prevent like bad actors, if you're imagining kind of a worst case scenario where somebody wants to sneakily like genetically engineer a single base pair change and not tell anybody, then that would be harder to tell. But I think my goal is to kind of get to a place where there's no reason to not disclose. I think right now we're creating a situation where brands are ashamed of using genetic engineering, so they're trying to hide it, which is how we got into this place in the first place, right? So
Right.
transparency is like the ultimate, like obvious and needed first step on having this conversation and starting to gain trust of consumers, because I think that there's just a lot of misinformation out there, and then that fear is flamed even further because the people using genetic engineering are hiding it. So as for instance, for our product, we say proudly GMO on every bottle and box of the product, and we talk about our use of genetic engineering, and I think that that's an important first step.
We're gonna get to the product right now, but I just want to say it would
Yeah.
it would be interesting to say, since we want to be transparent about this product was genetically modified for this reason. We wanted
Yes,
to increase the flavor
exactly.
profile, and because it's, when you think of GMO, when the consumer thinks of it, and I'm not joking about the millennials, to the extent that I have nieces that like, I'll call Paul, why would you even consider eating that?
Yeah.
Make them make the argument that you wouldn't know the difference, and actually was modified to do better for us in our bodies. Like, there's no reason that GMO by itself is a
Right.
harmful state.
And I think that that's an important point, is that like to date, I think it's another reason why there's a lot of fear, is that to date, the genetic engineering wasn't done for the consumer, right? So if you're in the store and you haven't, all you've heard is kind of like this like vocal minority. It's like saying like, GMOs are bad, and that was maybe originally motivated by the idea that like the practices around genetic engineering were bad, and so they're saying like, oh, they're unsafe or they're unhealthy, and genetic and anything GMO is bad. And then you walk into the store and you say, okay, I can either buy this can of corn that's GMO, or I could buy this can of corn that's non-GMO. And I don't know much about it, but like, I know that GMOs apparently are bad. And so I'll take
Mm-hmm.
the non-GMO one, because what's the benefit of me to take the GMO? There's no benefit to me, right? Like,
That's right.
it's yields per acre to the farmer, which is like, what do
Right.
I care about that? I mean, unless you care about sustainability, in which you would argue that it would be good potentially. But yeah, I think that's a really important thing, right? That if you're using the technology, you explain why you use that technology, what was the benefit. And I think that like aligning that purpose and that value can go a long way, right? Like, so for our product, and like you say, we'll get into it, but like we explicitly state like, this is why we genetically engineered, and here's the benefit to you. And so I envision a future in which people walk into the store and they look for a genetically engineered probiotic or product because they want the benefit, like like it was genetically engineered to do something that has some reason and some benefit. And so you're like, oh, what does this do? I want that. So I think that ultimately is how this advances, and that's how I think it should be used, is for everybody's benefit.
I just learned, and this is my 32nd year in this industry, and our company's 50th. And the noble grape of Cabernet Sauvignon, which is in Bordeaux, France, of course, and all over Napa Valley and all over the world, is one of the great grapes, is a natural hybrid. And that almost freaked me out. It's like, this, you would hope, wow, we hope this is some ancient grape that's been grown all over the
Right.
world, but it actually was just a hybrid that I don't think it was concocted on by man. It just happened in the field between Sauvignon Blanc and Cabernet Franc, and you end up with this really powerful grape that's done amazing things. And now we're saying, well, look, we can just do that. We just
Right.
do it on our own.
And, and I mean,
Go
the
ahead.
world opens up at that point.
Right. Well, I'm going to guess that that this product is not the anti-hangover ED medicine that we see at the gas station.
You guessed correctly. Yeah, it's a little different. We don't even describe it as sort of like anti-hangover, because I think even that is sort of like, as you can tell, I mean, very passionate about transparency and being, being clear about what we're doing and what we're not doing. And so a hangover, as it's kind of currently described, has a lot of different meanings to a lot of different people, and it's a cacophony of a lot of different kind of impacts that alcohol is having on your body. And so our product so it's called ZBiotics, and it's a small like half-ounce liquid beverage, and
Half
in
an
it
ounce.
is yeah, it's very small, so it's just kind of like
Wow.
a quick little shot. And the goal of that was that we wanted it to be easy to use, and for people to be able to enjoy that simply without having to drink a large volume, especially if they're
Right.
going to go and have a nice glass of wine or something, be full. And so this half ounce is just water, and we've suspended it in our proprietary probiotic strain. And so it's a probiotic is a live bacteria that you can eat. And there are many probiotics out there that do all kinds of different things. And but all of them are much like we were just talking about. Everything except for ours. Ours is the world's only. It was the world's first and still only genetically engineered probiotic in existence on the market.
For any purpose.
For any purpose.
For gut health or anything.
Yes, exactly. And so everything, all the other probiotics that are out there are just things that we found in the ground that we found were not harmful to people, that we then put into pills and gave to people and sort of make various claims about it. Without getting into too much detail there, I mean, I think that because you know, the goal there is to sort of have some effect on your gut and your gut health. And right in your gut, there is this community of microbes. And I don't want to go too far down the rabbit hole there, but that, that community of microbes is called the microbiome. And it has all these sort of effects on your body. And so the idea or the hypothesis behind probiotics is that that you would take this like good bacteria, probiotic bacteria, and that it would get in there and somehow affect your microbiome in some way that would be beneficial. And since everybody's microbiome is different, like you literally have as many bacterial cells in your gut as you do human cells in your whole body. And so everybody's community, it's constantly changing and they're all different. So the idea that this sort of silver bullet, this like bacteria could get in there into everybody's microbiome, which is totally different and uniformly perform a beneficial activity is not a very strong hypothesis from a microbiological standpoint, I'll say. And the data is consistent with that. We see that, I think the most generous thing you can say is that some probiotics can help some people sometimes. And so, if you're taking a probiotic and it makes you feel better, then it's helping you, that's great. But the consistency is not there. So what we did was we took the starter, which is a really cool idea, right? That we have these like live bacteria that could go in and possibly do something beneficial for you. And then we use genetic engineering to ensure that would happen. So basically we take a safe, edible bacteria that you eat every day of your life. And then we genetically engineered it to express an enzyme similar to one your liver uses called an acetaldehyde dehydrogenase. And this enzyme breaks down acetaldehyde specifically. And acetaldehyde is this very toxic metabolic byproduct of alcohol. And it's part of the reason that you feel not so great the day after drinking. And so we, essentially have created a bacteria that can reliably, as it's passing through your gut, it doesn't have to affect your microbiome in any way. The bacteria pass through your gut and they help your body basically break down this acetaldehyde that is forming as the alcohol gets metabolized, and remove that so that you feel better the next day. It's a very simple idea. We're really using the probiotic as the chassis to deliver a biological function, one that we know to be important. And so that will help, but of course, the way you feel the next day isn't entirely due to acetaldehyde. It's also due to certain direct effects of alcohol itself. Like, so the ethanol itself causes poor sleep. It sort of disrupts some of your endocrine balance. So you deal with some of that stuff, but the acetaldehyde is this highly toxic molecule that kind of results in a lot of that real misery that you can sometimes feel the next day. And so kind of we figured if we helped you tackle that, which is something that's difficult to kind of handle, and which nothing else in the market was doing, that we would really give you a leg up the next day. And indeed, that's kind of what we've been seeing.
So are you increasing that chemical? I'm not going to try and repeat it. Are you increasing it because it's already there naturally, or are you creating it because your body needs it to help?
No. So what we're doing is we are expressing an enzyme, so a protein essentially that can break down that molecule. So that molecule, so you have so basically to just give a high level of kind of like alcohol metabolism in your body. So when you drink, you drink and the ethanol is, the alcohol molecule is absorbed into your bloodstream and it circulates throughout your body and creates the effects. Yeah, right. Exactly. Creates the effects that it creates. And then it is basically from your blood, it goes into your liver and it's detoxified by your liver, and your liver breaks down that alcohol, that ethanol, in two stages. It uses one enzyme to convert the ethanol into acetaldehyde. And then it uses a second enzyme to immediately convert that acetaldehyde, which is very toxic, much more toxic than the alcohol itself, into acetate. And acetate is essentially vinegar. It's innocuous.
Hmm.
And at that point, the detoxification of ethanol is done. And subsequent metabolic reactions happen from the acetate. But for all intents and purposes of this story, it's really just two reactions done by two separate enzymes in your liver. And so that metabolism is very efficient. Your liver is very good at this. So very little of that intermediate acetaldehyde builds up in the liver, and that's not really the source of acetaldehyde. And so so why is our product important then? Is because what is not really appreciated very much, but is well established in the scientific literature, is that a small amount of the alcohol you drink is actually broken down directly in your gut, in large part by your microbiome, but also by some of the cells in your gut epithelium, in the lining of your gut. And so that small amount of alcohol is not particularly important from an alcohol metabolism standpoint. Most of the alcohol is absorbed, but all of the alcohol that's broken down in the gut is converted to acetaldehyde by a bacterial version of that first enzyme in the liver, the alcohol dehydrogenase. And so the alcohol becomes acetaldehyde in the gut, but then it doesn't subsequently go from acetaldehyde to acetate because that second enzyme is not very present in your gut. So even though it's the minor source of alcohol metabolism, what happens is that acetaldehyde starts to accumulate in your gut. And acetaldehyde concentrations in the gut actually reach like 10 times higher levels than they do in the bloodstream. And so even though it's a very minor source of alcohol metabolism, it ends up being the major source of acetaldehyde formation. And so if you remember, there's this enzyme in your liver that can handle that. And so what happens is normally is that acetaldehyde that accumulates in the gut is absorbed into your bloodstream. It's highly soluble like ethanol, and then it circulates throughout your body, and it kind of wreaks havoc throughout your body. It creates inflammation, cell death, all these different things, right? And then it's much like the alcohol from the bloodstream, it goes in the liver, and it's easily kind of broken down in the liver by the acetaldehyde dehydrogenase enzyme there. So what we've done with ZBiotics is essentially move that function of the liver, right, this acetaldehyde dehydrogenase enzyme, into the gut using a bacteria. And so when you take ZBiotics, you are now just sort of completing the same reaction that normally would happen in your liver, but it's happening in your gut where the acetaldehyde is initially forming. So that's really kind of the idea behind how ZBiotics works, is that we're able to basically deliver to your gut, a new function that it didn't have before. And that's
so you and I are sitting around the house. We're sitting around the fraternity room, the fraternity house. Yeah, we're partying.
Probably not, because we definitely. I want to be clear. This product is not for college kids. This product is for responsible adults who enjoy, like you and I, who enjoy a few glasses of wine or something, and don't want to feel their best the next day.
All right, fair enough. So I'm at a very fancy port tasting over the weekend. I mean, from high end stuff. Okay,
that's the picture. I think
I'm with James Suckling, the famed critic, right? And I say, hey, and I take out this vial. And so in a layman's term, he's going to say, what is that? I'm going to take this shot. I said, well, I'm going to have these ports. We tasted 25 ports 2 days in a row. So, we ingested quite a bit of sugar and alcohol. And he says, what is this? So in the layman's, to describe this to somebody, what am I going to tell them?
You're going to tell them it's a probiotic that has been engineered to break down that toxic byproduct of alcohol that makes you feel terrible the next day. So that's it. Perfect. So you take this probiotic, it breaks down that byproduct, you feel better. Strip down all the science to that nugget. Yeah.
And if we have to take this prior to consuming alcohol, can we take it after, or how long do I have to, does it sit there before it's no longer effective if I didn't start drinking?
Totally. So it's a live bacteria that basically passes through your gut. It doesn't seed the gut. And so it typically, obviously this is very person to person dependent on the kind of passage through the time it takes to passage through the gut. But on average, it's about 18 hours is how long the bacteria usually sticks around your gut. And so for that period of time, as it's floating through your gut, it's making this enzyme and helping your body deal with that acetaldehyde. So it only will work if it's in your body before the alcohol, right? Like any alcohol you drink before the product is going to get converted to acetaldehyde and get absorbed in the bloodstream in your body, and then the bacteria won't have access to it. So if you take it before, or basically I should say, the product will help with every drink you have after you take the product. So if you have 2 drinks, then have ZBiotics, and then have 4 more, it'll help with the 4 more. But it's obviously best to take it at the beginning, so it can help with everything.
It's interesting because you have a PhD, you've studied the science, you worked in labs, and worked with HIV drugs and et cetera, et cetera. And I go to the gas station, I'll just use as an example, which is funny, but or you go to the homeopathic section of a market or
Right.
Sprouts or something, and they have these ideas. It's all herb based or whatever. And I'd rather try something from a PhD who's been studying this all their lives than like I say a charlatan, but somebody that's just
Yeah.
professing the stuff. So, what you do I have to, are the ingredients labeled? Do you have to have a prescription? Is there
Hmm.
an FDA clearance on this? What it seems like it's
Yeah.
straddling between
Right.
the homeopathic stuff and maybe a prescription.
Totally. Yeah. So, that was, the technology, again, the difference between the sort of the technology and the product, right? The technology that we use, genetically engineering probiotic bacteria, is being used right now by drug companies to develop drugs for certain diseases. Because we built this product for healthy people, and it's, a live bacteria that you already eat every day of your life. It's a very common microbe, and it's been engineered to express an enzyme expressed already by your body and by 70% of all life on the planet. And there's no, risk of having too much of it or anything, that there's no real safety concerns, or like drug level safety concerns around it, that we can bring this product to market as a food. And so we brought so to your first question, yes, we label it, and we, so if you look on our box, it's just, it lists our ingredients just like any other food product. It says water. We have some flavoring in there, and then we have, B. subtilis ZB183, which is, B. subtilis is the bacteria, and ZB183 is our strain of that bacteria that's ours and proprietary, and that's everything that's in the product, and that's regulated by the FDA as a food. As with any new food, we had to show extensive safety testing of before we introduced the food to the market, and we did that. We did lots of different, we showed a lot of the safety around the genetics, and we showed the safety of the ingredient in terms of toxicity and allergenicity, and all the things you would do if you had any new food. And then we basically assembled all that data into a dossier, and we submitted it to a panel of expert toxicologists who are, have no skin in the game on our product at all. They're only their own reputations are on the line, and they reviewed our data, and determined the product to be safe, and said that yes, you can release this onto the market, and so that's what we did. And so that's called the generally recognized as safe, or GRAS, food pathway, which is what we use to bring the product to market. But if we wanted to make a drug, then it would obviously be a very different regulatory pathway, but same technology, but applied to something different.
I suppose it's no different than any of the probiotics that are out there, like what's that Japanese thing that comes in a little red bottle?
Right. Yeah, exactly. Like the idea that, like, probiotic, there's no reason why this probiotic wouldn't already exist. We just engineered it so that there was consistency. And so that we know that this bacteria can express this enzyme, which many bacteria in your gut already express. They just don't express it at the right time or in the right place. So we're really just creating a consistent effect. That's kind of the purpose of the genetic engineering, is just to create something reliable.
And the first version of this, is there more versions? One, have you refined it since you released it, and where is it?
Yeah. So no, because we got approval for this bacteria. So if we made any changes, I mean, we've changed the formulation in terms of like flavor and
Yeah, the
stuff,
flavor,
but
right,
we
yeah.
have not, yeah, changed. We haven't changed the bacteria at all, because if we did, then that would be a new strain at that point, and then we would have to go through that review process again. And so, the product we have now is the original one that we invented and launched 3 years ago. You can get it right now only on our website. We're only selling direct to consumer at the moment. So, zbiotics.com is the only, basically the only place you can get it. We have a few retail locations that are very small, like some gyms, and health shops and things like that, where they sell. But for all intents and purposes, our website is where you get the product at the moment.
Well, you did come from a family of entrepreneurs, and you had this idea. You worked in the labs. You're probably looking at some kind of career, that might find you in a big pharmaceutical location, creating drugs or whatever you were doing. But you had this idea to do this. How did you go about convincing people to
Yeah.
finance this? It can't be cheap to get to where you're at.
Totally. No, it isn't, and it was a lot of learning, and it was a lot of fun. Because when I started, I had
Says
this
no one
just
ever.
yeah, right, right. Well, it's fun, I guess, because I got there. I guess there was a
Yeah,
lot of
right,
stress
for
along the way.
sure.
I mean, we're not there yet. I guess we got a lot more work to do, of course. But like, I at least got to see the vision kind of. We were able to launch the world's first ever genetically engineered probiotic, and I feel very proud about that. And I think that was
That
the
is
vision when I
huge.
started with. Was thanks, yeah, was that we could do this. That like there's that this we started the whole conversation about kind of like my passion for this technology and all the good it can do for humanity. I think that like genetic engineering is a great tool in our toolbox as humanity to deal with some of our existential crises around feeding a growing population of people and dealing with emerging diseases, as well as dealing with climate change. I mean, all these things are things that genetic engineering can help with, and it getting thrown in the bus under the bus for kind of commercial reasons was something that was frustrating me personally. And I certainly wouldn't defend all of the ways that genetic engineering has been used, but I do think that the technology can be useful. And so I wanted to do something about that. And then simultaneously, I had this idea around the fact that we could take a live probiotic, safe bacteria that you can eat, and then engineer it to do something very useful and specific for you, whatever that may be. And so like, that was really the core of the idea. And the first time I pitched that idea, it was for a totally different indication. It was like very a very cool academic scientific idea that was objectively a very bad one from a commercialization perspective. Like it was around protecting your gut from radiation exposure, and it was really not something that
Wow.
anybody would ever care about. But that was the original idea for the just showing that like it took me a while to kind of figure out what would make sense commercially. And then so after my PhD, I actually was designing clinical trials for drug companies, working at a CRO, a contract research organization, designing clinical trials for drug companies. And I learned a lot about what it took to bring a technology to market. And I saw that there was a really big opportunity here, that all the best science was being used by drug companies to develop drugs. And I knew that little old me couldn't compete with like, the Pfizers and the Roches of the world, but that there was a lot of good this technology could do otherwise. And if I sort of match that with my desire to kind of elevate this conversation around genetic engineering, I thought, nobody chooses human insulin. You take it because you have to. And so there's no kind of
Hmm.
choice being made around genetic engineering there. But if I created a product that created some benefit for people that they wanted and was very transparent about my use of genetic engineering to create that benefit, then people will be armed with the information to make a decision for themselves and make a choice for or against genetic engineering. And I think that people haven't really been given that opportunity before. So the idea that I could make a product that we could bring to market and sell to people in the grocery store where they had it, or eventually in the grocery store, on our website, where people would have a choice around the use of genetic engineering and do the cost benefit analysis, I thought was a really exciting idea. And so that was part of the big motivation. And then finding an indication for people that made sense. I originally pitched kind of like that next day misery after drinking as sort of a joke, never thinking that's what I was going to do. But people got really excited about it, and they clearly understood what the benefit was. I realized that like that could be a great way to kind of introduce the technology. We're obviously, or maybe it's not obvious, but we are very excited about the broad reaching potential of genetically engineered probiotics. And we're building lots of products to do all kinds of different things. And so this was really just meant to be the introduction to the world of the tech and the proof of concept. But there's a lot more stuff we can do.
I think that's brilliant, actually, when you pick something as down to earth and close to everybody's heart as anti-hangover. But it still seems like to me the headwinds to a GMO product, as well as the snake oil idea, because we've seen so many of these anti-hangover
Yeah.
ideas. And we were talking a little bit about glutathione, which is a natural product of the liver that's supposed to help break down alcohol. And I was telling you about this product where you rub on your stomach, and your comment back was, yeah, well, where's the science of that? And I understand that.
Right.
But again, and I there there could be the snake oil concept behind that, or this, but just the headwinds, just the perception of,
Yeah,
oh, sure,
definitely.
you're going to help me with my hangover. I mean, have you sensed
Right.
that? And
Oh,
then
absolutely. It's
you,
regardless of what you of who you are or where you come from, the first thing that anybody thinks when they hear about the product is just eye roll,
Yeah.
and like a lot of skepticism. And so we have to kind of, yes, climb that hill a little bit with people and be like, hold on, like, hear me out. Like, this isn't just sort of like random vitamins or like plant extracts like swept into a bottle that you see at the gas station, right? Like, it's, this is cutting edge like biotechnology that, like, we worked really hard on, that is very rationally designed from the get-go, and there's nothing else like it on the planet. And so we sort of climb the hill. And then to your point around the GMO headwind, believe it or not, this is one of those kind of pervasive myths, that in the US at least, there is a very vocal minority of people who are anti-GMO, and then the rest of people are either. So interestingly, if you look, so there's a lot of research on this. So if you look at unbiased research, right, like if you ask very loaded questions like, would you prefer a non-GMO product? People are mostly going to say yes to that, right? But if you ask like unbiased and unloaded questions, and you kind of take the real temperature of kind of people, consumers in the US, like Pew Research did a big thing on this. We've done a ton of research on this as well, in lots of focus groups and things. And what we find is that like the majority of people actually have no opinion or think positively about GMOs. It's about 60% of the population doesn't really care one way or the other. And so already there, we're talking about like, if you're designing a product for men, you've already eliminated 50% of the population. We're only at most eliminating 40%.
Yeah, right.
And
That's a
then
good point.
even with the 40% who are anti-GMO, it's really only about a third to half of them that are really vehemently anti-GMO. And so that 15 to 20% of the population is really creating a lot of the fervor. And I think that the other kind of half are, the other 20 to 30% of people are they're anti-GMO. It's a conviction loosely held. They're like, I've heard it's bad. I don't really know why, but I try to avoid it because I've heard it's bad for you. And so if you basically present people with like, hey, this is a product, we use genetic engineering. That's what makes it good. That's what makes it work. That's what makes it special. And like, here's what the benefit is to you. Those people are like, oh, I'm interested. I'd like to try that. And it eliminates the sort of like mystique or mystery around it. So I'd say that the anti-GMO headwind has not been as strong for us, because I think that most people are open to new technology when it's explained to them, and they're given a choice, an honest choice, as opposed to kind of having it snuck in there.
It's interesting because it happens in our industry. It happens in all consumer products. I mean, we're experiencing the non-GMO thing right now, but for wine, for instance, this Fit Vine wine, that wine is some kind of health beverage, and we're going to make it healthier for you. We're going to reduce the sugar and whatever else they're doing to it, and then, oh, by the way, we're going to remove all the flavor, and it's going to taste like hell. And right. So all of a sudden now you're drinking this stuff that tastes like kombucha for no reason, because you think it's better for you, when it's like you're not taking it in the first place as some kind of health beverage, right? I mean, if you buy quality wine, you're going to get no sugar, you're going to get proper structure, you're not going to get additives. But if you're going to buy 19 Crimes or something, yeah, you're going to get a bunch of crap in it. But for the most part, we're being bamboozled into thinking that these brands on the shelf that are supposed to be healthy for you are no more healthy than just a quality made wine. Do you drink wine yourself?
I do. I wouldn't call myself like necessarily like a connoisseur, but I definitely drink wine with my wife. And yeah, I would agree with you that I think that it's about the purpose of the wine, right? Like, if you drink wine because you enjoy it, like, you acknowledge that it's not a health drink, and so trying to kind of like, that's all brand play, right? That they're trying to convince you that you can sort of like, that their wine is going to be better for you in some way. If they can't compete, like you say, on quality, then they're going to do this other thing. And at the end of the day, it's like, if you want a healtty drink, don't like,
that's not it.
Drink smoothies or whatever it is. Smoothies are probably not that healthy either, but drink something healthy. And so like, the idea that we can sort of like, just exactly. And I think we all deal with this, right? It's like, it's so pervasive that like these things, like, it's back in the 90s, right? If it was fat free, it was healthy, right? And we obviously know that, like, these things were loaded with sugar and preservatives and things like that. They're not healthy for you at all. But it was fat free, right? And then, now it's like sugar free is like healthy, but it's like, again, like, just because it's a vegan doesn't make it healthy at all, right? It just means that it doesn't have animal products in it. And so people kind of use these trigger words and these keywords to really bamboozle or trick people. And I think that that's really antithetical to our brand, right? We try to be very open and transparent and treat people like adults. Don't trick people. Don't leave misleading comments. A good example of this is like, we talked about regulations, and we said like, you asked if we're regulated by the FDA, and I said, yeah, we are. And what a lot, and so there's FDA approval, which is preserved for drugs. So
Mhm.
FDA only approves drugs. If you file investigative new drug application and you go through all the clinical trials at the end, you get a drug and you have FDA approval of that drug. If you're not a drug, if you're a food or a supplement, there is no FDA approval. The FDA regulates you, but does not approve you. And so you can be compliant with FDA regulations, but you are not FDA approved. And a lot of supplement companies will have in big letters like on their website or on their bottle, like FDA compliant. Which is so misleading, right? They want you to think FDA approved. They want you to think we're a drug, but in reality, all they're saying is that they manufactured this like without, allowing, insects into the, into the
Yeah,
manufacturing
right.
process of like just kept it clean. And so, it's things like that I think that like, they're looking to trick people. And I think that's something that's really frustrating for me, is because right now people are being tricked into believing that certain things make the product better that they don't. And so we're really trying to kind of elevate that a little bit, that conversation a little bit.
There is no definition, FDA definition for natural food. Even if your bagel bag says natural, it means nothing.
Right. Yeah.
In fact,
Right. Yeah.
it's almost. I think on the website, the FDA website, it says something to the effect of, "Well, natural. We just say we assume that there's nothing in there that shouldn't be in there." But there's
Right.
it's not prescribed. Same with wine. There's no. Everybody talks about natural
Sure.
wine. There is no such thing as natural wine. Maybe
Totally.
no.
Arsenic is totally natural,
Yeah,
like, I mean,
right.
like,
Right.
natural, that means literally nothing, like, everything, at the
Does
end of
this
the day
work
is
on
natural.
distilled spirits as well as fermented products? It's the same
Yeah,
alcohol.
yeah. I
That's the
mean,
way
so it's all about,
the
right, like,
molecule's the same.
exactly. Ethanol, right, is regardless of where the source is, if it's from wine, beer, or spirits, right? That ethanol in your body is processed the exact same way. The ethanol is converted into
Mhm.
acetaldehyde and then converted to acetate. So the reason why you might feel different after drinking those things is due to a host of other things, like mostly the rate at which your body absorbs the alcohol, but there's several other kind of smaller impacts as well, of like byproducts of fermentation and different things like that. But in general, it's really just about ethanol and acetaldehyde, and you're going to get acetaldehyde if you drink ethanol, regardless of where it comes from.
It's interesting. I drink gin because I feel like drinking gin. My father was a gin drinker, and I drink a Manhattan bourbon base because I feel like that what it's going to do, and that's the difference. But I also have cravings for particular wines, and that's probably not based on the alcohol. It's probably based on the flavor profile. But
The taste, yeah.
it's the flavors. Because I do have a healthy cocktail that I created. I call it the Russian Olympian. Right, there's the black Russian, the white Russian,
Right.
and then the Russian vodka. But this is Russian vodka, muscle milk, and, and vanilla bitters. Right, so you get a little buzz, and then you get like 30 grams of protein for every,
Right.
every glass.
So go hit the gym. Yeah, you'll be good. Yeah.
This has been a fascinating conversation. We're almost on an hour, and I don't want to take any more time. But I'm going to do something here with you, have some fun, since you're in the industry, the alcohol industry, as well as a microbiologist, because I have this book here. It's called "Wine is the Best Medicine." It's a French MD. He's also a homeopathic doctor as well, and so he wrote a book on human maladies and the various types of French wines only. So I only do this with people like you and French winemakers. If I do it to an Italian guy, they're never happy. So I'm gonna give you a malady here, and then I'm gonna give you 3 choices of wines that you may or may not be familiar with. But the funny thing, the answer to this question is related to the compound of the wine. So
Okay.
let's say you had hypertension. You
Okay.
could have a glass of champagne. Not a glass. I'll tell you the dosage afterwards. But you could have
Yeah.
champagne if you have hypertension. You can have a Sancerre, which is a French white wine from the southwest of France, or you could have a red wine from Bordeaux, France,
That one.
which is Cabernet.
The red one. The
So
Bordeaux.
what would be so now? If you were to study, and I brought this up the other day in a podcast, if you were to study to be a master sommelier or earn the master of wine credential, you would have to defend the answers to your questions, wrong or right. So what's the defense of Bordeaux?
So the Bordeaux is because hypertension, acetaldehyde is a vasodilator, which is what creates the flushing reaction. So red wines are much higher in acetaldehyde. And so acetaldehyde is not to be confused with the acetaldehyde. It's the same molecule, but the acetaldehyde being produced by your body is a breakdown product of ethanol. Some alcohols have acetaldehyde in them as a congener, as a byproduct of the fermentation process. And so red wines are high in acetaldehyde. high urine acetaldehyde naturally already. And so that would be a vasodilator, which I would suspect would counteract some of the hypertension. That would be my pick.
Okay, so we're going to go a little longer here because that's the most granular answer I've ever heard. So we would just give you, we would just say yes because you answered it with such granularity. But the answer, according to them anyway, is the Sancerre, and the reason he says that is because it's these wines are more of a diuretic for one, and they cause the release of urea chlorides and uric acid. Therefore, they help eliminate the excess of organic liquid, which promotes the blood plethora.
Okay.
And a dosage is 2 glasses per meal. However, this doctor didn't have the technologies available to him as you do today. So he's
okay. Well,
but then
I didn't think about it from the diuretic perspective. That's interesting. Yeah.
The reason I brought it up again is that hypochlorhydria, which is sluggishness of the stomach. And since we're talking about, probiotic, let's take a look at this. Sluggish of the stomach. Good digestion is often more important than good food. Digestion is a process which takes it in an acid milieu. Poor digestion is often due either to lack of tone in the gastric muscle or an insufficiency of digestive secretions. And those two phenomena are, in most cases, associated. That makes sense so far?
Yeah.
So a cure is a matter of restoring to the weakened stomach its normal muscular tone in a properly acidic milieu. And so the answer to the question of stomach sluggishness was champagne with a favorable pH.
Mm-hmm. Again, there'd be a higher or lower pH, which I would agree. I was expecting the opposite. I was expecting the prediction of a low pH, but actually that would not work in that direction. So a higher pH beverage would create higher pH in the stomach. Yeah. Excuse me. I'm sorry. A lower pH.
Right.
Low pH. I'm sorry. A higher acidity is what I meant to say. So
right.
like low
2.85 pH.
Yeah. Exactly. And so that would also create a low pH, a high acidity in the stomach. So the what was it? Hypochlorhydria or whatever.
Yes.
Like hypo is low, and then chloro is like hydrochloric acid is the acid. So you have low acid in the stomach, and then you drink an acidic beverage to actually boost the acid in your stomach.
It's incredible. We should go through the whole book. It says here, tannins, glucides, natural carbon dioxide. Moreover, they contain potassium as a bitartrate, whose effect on the flexibility of the muscle fibers is known. But isn't that fun?
That is very fun. Totally.
And the dosage is 2 glasses after a meal. So, the worst, there are a couple of ailments here where the guy says, we're not sure, but you feel better anyway.
Yeah, right. Totally. We don't know why, but yeah. Yeah. That's cool.
Zach, it's been a fascinating conversation, and I am definitely going to log on and see if we can bring some Z-Biotic in here and put it to the clinical test here, right here.
Absolutely. I mean, you got to test it. It's science, man.
On Tuesdays, I taste usually 75 wines before the end of the day, and I get home and we're going to start that this time. It's such a fascinating conversation, and like I said, when we're up in San Francisco, we're going to come see you, and we'll do it live, and we'll peel it back a little further.
That'd be awesome. I'd love that. It's been super fun. Thank you, Paul, so much for the conversation.
And the website again is zbiotics.com?
Correct. Yeah.
Check it out. Thanks again.
All right. Cool. Thank you.
Cheers.